Chapter 1. A man may have no bad habits and have worse. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. The starting point of this lecturing trip around the world was Paris, where we had been living a year or two. We sailed for America and there made certain preparations. This took but little time. 2 members of my family elected to go with me, also a carbuncle. The dictionary says a carbuncle is a kind of jewel. Humor is out of place in a dictionary. We started westward from New York in midsummer, with Major Pond to manage the platform business as far as the Pacific. It was warm work, all the way, and the last fortnight of it was suffocatingly smoky, for in Oregon and British Columbia the forest fires were raging. We had an added week of smoke at the seaboard, where we were obliged to wait a while for our ship. She had been getting herself ashore in the smoke, and she had to be docked and repaired. We sailed at last, and so ended a snail-paced march across the continent, which had lasted 40 days. We moved westward about mid-afternoon over a rippled and sparkling summer sea, an enticing sea, a clean and cool sea, and apparently a welcome sea to all on board. It certainly was to me, after the distressful dustings and smokings and swelterings of the past weeks. The voyage would furnish a 3 weeks holiday, with hardly a break in it. We had the whole Pacific Ocean in front of us, with nothing to do but do nothing and be comfortable. The city of Victoria was twinkling dim in the deep heart of her smoke cloud, and getting ready to vanish, and now, we closed the field glasses and sat down on our steamer chairs contented and at peace. But they went to wreck and ruin under us and brought us to shame before all the passengers. They had been furnished by the largest furniture-dealing house in Victoria, and were worth a couple of farthings a dozen, though they had cost us the price of honest chairs. In the Pacific and Indian Oceans, one must still bring his own deck share on board or go without, just as in the old forgotten Atlantic times, those dark ages of sea travel. Ours was a reasonably comfortable ship, with the customary seagoing fare, plenty of good food furnished by the deity and cooked by the devil. The discipline observable on board was perhaps as good as it is anywhere in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The ship was not very well arranged for tropical service, but that is nothing, for this is the rule for ships which ply in the tropics. She had an oversupply of cockroaches, but this is also the rule with ships doing business in the summer seas, at least such as have been long in service. Our young captain was a very handsome man, tall and perfectly formed, the very figure to show up a smart uniform's finest effects. He was a man of the best intentions, and was polite and courteous even to courtliness. There was a soft and grace and finish about his manners which made whatever place he happened to be in seem for the moment a drawing-room. He avoided the smoking room. He had no vices. He did not smoke or chew tobacco or take snuff. He did not swear, or use slang or rude, or coarse, or indelicate language, or make puns, or tell anecdotes, or laugh intemperately, or raise his voice above the moderate pitch enjoined by the canons of good form. When he gave an order, his manner modified it into a request. After dinner, he and his officers joined the ladies and gentlemen in the ladies' saloon, and shared in the singing and piano playing, and helped turn the music. He had a sweet and sympathetic tenor voice, and used it with taste and effect. After the music he played whist there, always with the same partner and opponents, until the ladies' bedtime. The electric lights burned there as late as the ladies and their friends might desire, but they were not allowed to burn in the smoking room after 11. There were many laws on the ship's statute book, of course, but so far as I could see, this and one other were the only ones that were rigidly enforced. The captain explained that he enforced this one because his own cabin adjoined the smoking room, and the smell of tobacco smoke made him sick. I did not see how our smoke could reach him, for the smoking room and his cabin were on the upper deck, targets for all the winds that blew, and besides there was no crack of communication between them, no opening of any sort in the solid intervening bulkhead. Still, to a delicate stomach, even imaginary smoke can convey damage. The captain, with his gentle nature, his polish, his sweetness, his moral and verbal purity, seemed pathetically out of place in his rude and autocratic vocation. It seemed another instance of the irony of fate. He was going home under a cloud. The passengers knew about his trouble and were sorry for him. Approaching Vancouver through a narrow and difficult passage, densely befogged with smoke from the forest fires, he had had the ill luck to lose his bearings and get his ship on the rocks. A matter like this would rank merely as an error with you and me. It ranks as a crime with the directors of steamship companies. The captain had been tried by the Admiralty Court at Vancouver, and its verdict had acquitted him of blame. But that was insufficient comfort. A sterner court would examine the case in Sydney, the court of directors, the lords of a company in whose ships the captain had served as mate a number of years. This was his first voyage as captain. The officers of our ship were hardy and companionable young men, and they entered into the general amusements and helped the passengers pass the time. Voyages in the Pacific and Indian Oceans are but pleasure excursions for all hands. Our purser was a young Scotchman who was equipped with a grit that was remarkable. He was an invalid and looked it as far as his body was concerned, but illness could not subdue his spirit. He was full of life and had a gay and capable tongue. To all appearances, he was a sick man without being aware of it, for he did not talk about his ailments, and his bearing and conduct were those of a person in robust health. Yet he was the prey, at intervals, of ghastly sieges of pain in his heart. These lasted many hours, and while the attack continued, he could neither sit nor lie. In one instance, he stood on his feet 24 hours fighting for his life with these sharp agonies, and yet was as full of life and cheer and activity the next day as if nothing had happened. The brightest passenger in the ship, and the most interesting and felicitous talker, was a young Canadian who was not able to let the whiskey bottle alone. He was of a rich and powerful family, and could have had a distinguished career and abundance of effective help toward it if he could have conquered his appetite for drink. But he could not do it, so his great equipment of talent was of no use to him. He had often taken the pledge to drink no more, and was a good sample of what that sort of unwisdom can do for a man with anything short of an iron will. The system is wrong in two ways. It does not strike at the root of the trouble, for one thing, and to make a pledge of any kind is to declare war against nature. For a pledge is a chain that is always clanking and reminding the wearer of it that he is not a free man. I have said that the system does not strike at the root of the trouble, and I venture to repeat that. The root is not the drinking, but the desire to drink. These are very different things. The one merely requires will, and a great deal of it, both as to bulk and staying capacity. The other merely requires watchfulness, and for no long time. The desire, of course, precedes the act, and should have one's first attention. It can do but little good to refuse the act over and over again, always leaving the desire unmolested, unconquered. The desire will continue to assert itself, and will be almost sure to win in the long run. When the desire intrudes, it should be at once banished out of the mind. One should be on the watch for it all the time, otherwise it will get in. It must be taken in time and not allowed to get a lodgment. A desire constantly repulsed for a fortnight should die then. That should cure the drinking habit. The system of refusing the mere act of drinking and leaving the desire in full force is unintelligent war tactics, it seems to me. I used to take pledges and soon violate them. My will was not strong, and I could not help it. And then, to be tied in any way naturally irks an otherwise free person and makes him chafe in his bonds and want to get his liberty. But when I finally ceased from taking definite pledges, and merely resolved that I would kill an injurious desire, but leave myself free to resume the desire and the habit whenever I should choose to do so, I had no more trouble. In 5 days I drove out the desire to smoke, and was not obliged to keep watch after that, and I never experienced any strong desire to smoke again. At the end of a year and a quarter of idleness, I began to write a book, and presently found that the pen was strangely reluctant to go. I tried to smoke to see if that would help me out of the difficulty. It did. I smoked 8 or 10 cigars and as many pipes a day for 5 months, finished the book, and did not smoke again until a year had gone by and another book had to be begun. I can quit any of my 19 injurious habits at any time, and without discomfort or inconvenience. I think that the Dr. Tanners and those others who go 40 days without eating do it by resolutely keeping out the desire to eat in the beginning, and that after a few hours the desire is discouraged and comes no more. Once I tried my scheme in a large medical way. I had been confined to my bed several days with lumbago. My case refused to improve. Finally, the doctor said, "My remedies have no fair chance. Consider what they have to fight besides the lumbago. You smoke extravagantly, don't you?" "Yes." "You take coffee immoderately." "Yes." "And some tea." "Yes." "You eat all kinds of things that are dissatisfied with each other's company." "Yes." "You drink 2 hot scotches every night." "Yes." "Very well, there you see what I have to contend against. We can't make progress the way the matter stands. You must make a reduction in these things. You must cut down your consumption of them considerably for some days." "I can't, doctor." "Why can't you?" "I lack the willpower. I can cut them off entirely, but I can't merely moderate them." He said that that would answer, and said he would come around in 24 hours and begin work again. He was taken ill himself and could not come, but I did not need him. I cut off all those things for 2 days and nights. In fact, I cut off all kinds of food, too, and all drinks except water, and at the end of the 48 hours the lumbago was discouraged and left me. I was a well man, so I gave thanks and took to those delicacies again. It seemed a valuable medical course, and I recommended it to a lady. She had run down and down and down, and had at last reached a point where medicines no longer had any helpful effect upon her. I said I knew I could put her upon her feet in a week. It brightened her up, it filled her with hope, and she said she would do everything I told her to do. So I said she must stop swearing and drinking and smoking and eating for 4 days, and then she would be all right again. And it would have happened just so, I know it, but she said she could not stop swearing and smoking and drinking because she had never done those things. So there it was. She had neglected her habits and hadn't any. Now that they would have come good, there were none in stock. She had nothing to fall back on. She was a sinking vessel, with no freight in her to throw overpard and lighten ship withal. Why, even one or two little bad habits could have saved her, but she was just a moral pauper. When she could have acquired them, she was dissuaded by her parents, who were ignorant people though reared in the best society, and it was too late to begin now. It seemed such a pity, but there was no help for it. These things ought to be attended to while a person is young. Otherwise, when age and disease come, there is nothing effectual to fight them with. When I was a youth, I used to take all kinds of pledges and do my best to keep them, but I never could because I didn't strike at the root of the habit, the desire. I generally broke down within the month. Once I tried limiting a habit. That worked tolerably well for a while. I pledged myself to smoke but 1 cigar a day. I kept the cigar waiting until bedtime, then I had a luxurious time with it. But desire persecuted me every day and all day long. So, within the week I found myself hunting for larger cigars than I had been used to smoke. Then larger ones still, and still larger ones. Within the fortnight I was getting cigars made for me, on a yet larger pattern. They still grew and grew in size. Within the month my cigar had grown to such proportions that I could have used it as a crutch. It now seemed to me that a 1 cigar limit was no real protection to a person, so I knocked my pledge on the head and resumed my liberty. To go back to that young Canadian. He was a remittance man, the first one I had ever seen or heard of. Passengers explained the term to me. They said that dissipated ne'er-do-wells belonging to important families in England and Canada were not cast off by their people while there was any hope of reforming them, but when that last hope perished at last, the ne'er-do-well was sent abroad to get him out of the way. He was shipped off with just enough money in his pocket, no, in the purser's pocket, for the needs of the voyage, and when he reached his destined port, he would find a remittance awaiting him there. Not a large one, but just enough to keep him a month. A similar remittance would come monthly thereafter. It was the remittance man's custom to pay his month's board and lodging straightway, a duty which his landlord did not allow him to forget, then spree away the rest of his money in a single night, then brood and mope and grieve in idleness till the next remittance came. It is a pathetic life. We had other remittsmen on board, it was said. At least they said they were RMS, there were two. But they did not resemble the Canadian. They lacked his tidiness and his brains and his gentlemanly ways and his resolute spirit and his humanities and generosities. One of them was a lad of 19 or 20, and he was a good deal of a ruin as to clothes and morals and general aspect. He said he was a scion of a ducal house in England, and had been shipped to Canada for the house's relief, that he had fallen into trouble there, and was now being shipped to Australia. He said he had no title. Beyond this remark, he was economical of the truth. The first thing he did in Australia was to get into the lockup, and the next thing he did was to proclaim himself an earl in the police court in the morning and fail to prove it. Chapter 2. When in doubt, tell the truth. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. About 4 days out from Victoria, we plunged into hot weather, and all the male passengers put on white linen clothes. 1 or 2 days later, we crossed the 25th parallel of north latitude, and then, by order, the officers of the ship laid away their blue uniforms and came out in white linen ones. All the ladies were in white by this time. This prevalence of snowy costumes gave the promenade deck an invitingly cool and cheerful and picnicky aspect. From my diary. There are several sorts of ills in the world from which a person can never escape altogether, let him journey as far as he will. One escapes from one breed of an ill only to encounter another breed of it. We have come far from the snake liar and the fish liar, and there was rest and peace in the thought. But now we have reached the realm of the boomerang liar, and sorrow is with us once more. The first officer has seen a man try to escape from his enemy by getting behind a tree, But the enemy sent his boomerang sailing into the sky far above and beyond the tree. Then it turned, descended, and killed the man. The Australian passenger has seen this thing done to two men, behind two trees, and by the one arrow. This being received with a large silence that suggested doubt, he buttressed it with the statement that his brother once saw the boomerang kill a bird away off 100 yards and bring it to the thrower. But these are ills which must be borne. There is no other way. The talk passed from the boomerang to dreams, usually a fruitful subject, afloat or ashore, but this time the output was poor. Then it passed to instances of extraordinary memory with better results. Blind Tom, the Negro pianist, was spoken of, and it was said that he could accurately play any piece of music, howsoever long and difficult, after hearing it once. And that 6 months later he could accurately play it again, without having touched it in the interval. One of the most striking of the stories told was furnished by a gentleman who had served on the staff of the Viceroy of India. He read the details from his notebook and explained that he had written them down right after the consummation of the incident which they described, because he thought that if he did not put them down in black and white, he might presently come to think he had dreamed them or invented them. The Viceroy was making a progress, and among the shows offered by the Maharaja of Mysore for his entertainment was a memory exhibition. The Viceroy and 30 gentlemen of his suite sat in a row, and the memory expert, a high-caste Brahmin, was brought in and seated on the floor in front of them. He said he knew but two languages, the English and his own, but would not exclude any foreign tongue from the tests to be applied to his memory. Then he laid before the assemblage his program, a sufficiently extraordinary one. He proposed that one gentleman should give him one word of a foreign sentence and tell him its place in the sentence. He was furnished with the French word est, and was told it was second in a sentence of 3 words. The next gentleman gave him the German word verloren and said it was the third in a sentence of 4 words. He asked the next gentleman for one detail in a sum in addition, another for one detail in a sum of subtraction, others for single details in mathematical problems of various kinds. He got them. Intermediates gave him single words from sentences in Greek, Latin, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and other languages, and told him their places in the sentences. When at last everybody had furnished him a single rag from a foreign sentence or a figure from a problem, he went over the ground again, and got a second word and a second figure and was told their places in the sentences and the sums, and so on and so on. He went over the ground again and again until he had collected all the parts of the sums and all the parts of the sentences, and all in disorder, of course, not in their proper rotation. This had occupied 2 hours. The Brahmin now sat silent and thinking a while, then began and repeated all the sentences, placing the words in their proper order, and untangled the disordered arithmetical problems and gave accurate answers to them all. In the beginning, he had asked the company to throw almonds at him during the 2 hours, he to remember how many each gentleman had thrown. But none were thrown, for the Viceroy said that the test would be a sufficiently severe strain without adding that burden to it. General Grant had a fine memory for all kinds of things, including even names and faces, and I could have furnished an instance of it if I had thought of it. The first time I ever saw him was early in his first term as president. I had just arrived in Washington from the Pacific coast, a stranger and wholly unknown to the public, and was passing the White House one morning when I met a friend, a senator from Nevada. He asked me if I would like to see the president. I said I should be very glad, so we entered. I supposed that the president would be in the midst of a crowd, and that I could look at him in peace and security from a distance, as another stray cat might look at another king. But it was in the morning, and the senator was using a privilege of his office which I had not heard of, the privilege of intruding upon the chief magistrate's working hours. Before I knew it, the senator and I were in the presence, and there was none there but we three. General Grant got slowly up from his table, put his pen down, and stood before me with the iron expression of a man who had not smiled for 7 years, and was not intending to smile for another 7. He looked me steadily in the eyes, mine lost confidence and fell. I had never confronted a great man before, and was in a miserable state of funk and inefficiency. The senator said, "Mr. President, may I have the privilege of introducing Mr. Clemens?" The president gave my hand an unsympathetic wag and dropped it. He did not say a word but just stood. In my trouble I could not think of anything to say, I merely wanted to resign. There was an awkward pause, a dreary pause, a horrible pause. Then I thought of something and looked up into that unyielding face and said timidly, "Mr. President, I am embarrassed, are you?" His face broke just a little, a wee glimmer, the momentary flicker of a summer lightning smile, 7 years ahead of time, and I was out and gone as soon as it was. 10 years passed away before I saw him the second time. Meantime, I was become better known, and was one of the people appointed to respond to toasts at the banquet given to General Grant in Chicago by the Army of the Tennessee when he came back from his tour around the world. I arrived late at night and got up late in the morning. All the corridors of the hotel were crowded with people waiting to get a glimpse of General Grant when he should pass to the place whence he was to review the great procession. I worked my way by the suite of packed drawing rooms, and at the corner of the house I found a window open where there was a roomy platform decorated with flags and carpeted. I stepped out on it and saw below me millions of people blocking all the streets, and other millions caked together in all the windows and on all the housetops around. These masses took me for General Grant and broke into volcanic explosions and cheers, but it was a good place to see the procession, and I stayed. Presently I heard the distant blare of military music, and far up the street I saw the procession come in sight, cleaving its way through the huzzing multitudes, with Sheridan, the most martial figure of the war, riding at its head in the dress uniform of a lieutenant general. And now General Grant, arm in arm with Major Carter Harrison, stepped out on the platform, followed two and two by the badged and uniformed reception committee. General Grant was looking exactly as he had looked upon that trying occasion of 10 years before, all iron and bronze self-possession. Mr. Harrison came over and led me to the general and formally introduced me. Before I could put together the proper remark, General Grant said, "Mr. Clemens, I am not embarrassed, are you?" And that little 7-year smile twinkled across his face again. 17 years have gone by since then, and today, in New York, the streets are a crush of people who are there to honor the remains of the great soldier as they pass to their final resting place under the monument, and the air is heavy with dirges and the boom of artillery, and all the millions of America are thinking of the man who restored the Union and the flag, and gave to democratic government a new lease of life, and, as we may hope and do believe, a permanent place among the beneficent institutions of men. We had one game in the ship which was a good time passer. At least it was at night in the smoking room, when the men were getting freshened up from the day's monotonies and dullnesses. It was the completing of non-complete stories. That is to say, a man would tell all of a story except the finish, then the others would try to supply the ending out of their own invention. When everyone who wanted a chance had had it, the man who had introduced the story would give it its original ending. Then you could take your choice. Sometimes the new endings turned out to be better than the old one. But the story which called out the most persistent and determined and ambitious effort was one which had no ending, and so there was nothing to compare the new-made endings with. The man who told it said he could furnish the particulars up to a certain point only, because that was as much of the tale as he knew. He had read it in a volume of sketches 25 years ago, and was interrupted before the end was reached. He would give any one $50 who would finish the story to the satisfaction of a jury to be appointed by ourselves. We appointed a jury and wrestled with the tale. We invented plenty of endings, but the jury voted them all down. The jury was right. It was a tale which the author of it may possibly have completed satisfactorily, and if he really had that good fortune, I would like to know what the ending was. Any ordinary man will find that the story's strength is in its middle, and that there is apparently no way to transfer it to the close, where of course it ought to be. In substance, the storiette was as follows. John Brown, aged 31, good, gentle, bashful, timid, lived in a quiet village in Missouri. He was superintendent of the Presbyterian Sunday School. It was but a humble distinction. Still, it was his only official one, and he was modestly proud of it and was devoted to its work and its interests. The extreme kindliness of his nature was recognized by all. In fact, people said that he was made entirely out of good impulses and bashfulness, that he could always be counted upon for help when it was needed, and for bashfulness both when it was needed and when it was. Mary Taylor, 23, modest, sweet, winning, and in character and person beautiful, was all in all to him, and he was very nearly all in all to her. She was wavering, his hopes were high. Her mother had been in opposition from the first, but she was wavering too, he could see it. She was being touched by his warm interest in her two charity protégées and by his contributions toward their support. These were two forlorn and aged sisters who lived in a log hut in a lonely place up a cross road 4 miles from Mrs. Taylor's farm. One of the sisters was crazy, and sometimes a little violent, but not often. At last the time seemed ripe for a final advance, and Brown gathered his courage together and resolved to make it. He would take along a contribution of double the usual size and win the mother over. With her opposition annulled, the rest of the conquest would be sure and prompt. He took to the road in the middle of a placid Sunday afternoon in the soft Missourian summer, and he was equipped properly for his mission. He was clothed all in white linen, with a blue ribbon for a necktie, and he had on dressy tight boots. His horse and buggy were the finest that the livery stable could furnish. The lap robe was of white linen. It was new, and it had a hand-worked border that could not be rivaled in that region for beauty and elaboration. When he was 4 miles out on the lonely road and was walking his horse over a wooden bridge, his straw hat blew off and fell in the creek, and floated down and lodged against a bar. He did not quite know what to do. He must have the hat, that was manifest, but how was he to get it? Then he had an idea. The roads were empty, nobody was stirring. Yes, he would risk it. He led the horse to the roadside and set it to cropping the grass. Then he undressed and put his clothes in the buggy, petted the horse a moment to secure its compassion and its loyalty, then hurried to the stream. He swam out and soon had the hat. When he got to the top of the bank, the horse was gone. His legs almost gave way under him. The horse was walking leisurely along the road. Brown trotted after it, saying, "Whoa, whoa, there's a good fellow." But whenever he got near enough to chance a jump for the buggy, the horse quickened its pace a little and defeated him. And so this went on, the naked man perishing with anxiety and expecting every moment to see people come in sight. He tagged on, imploring the horse, beseeching the horse, till he had left a mile behind him and was closing up on the Taylor premises. Then at last he was successful and got into the buggy. He flung on his shirt, his necktie, and his coat, then reached for, but he was too late. He sat suddenly down and pulled up the lap robe, for he saw someone coming out of the gate. A woman, he thought. He wheeled the horse to the left and struck briskly up the crossroad. It was perfectly straight and exposed on both sides, but there were woods and a sharp turn 3 miles ahead, and he was very grateful when he got there. As he passed around the turn, he slowed down to a walk and reached for his TR, too late again. He had come upon Mrs. Enderby, Mrs. Glossop, Mrs. Taylor, and Mary. They were on foot and seemed tired and excited. They came at once to the buggy and shook hands, and all spoke at once, and said eagerly and earnestly how glad they were that he was come, and how fortunate it was. And Mrs. Enderby said impressively, "It looks like an accident, his coming at such a time, but let no one profane it with such a name. He was sent from on high." They were all moved, and Mrs. Glossop said in an odd voice, "Sarah Enderby, you never said a truer word in your life. This is no accident, it is a special providence. He was sent, he is an angel as truly as ever angel was, an angel of deliverance. I say angel, Sarah Enderby, and will have no other word. Don't let anyone ever say to me again that there's no such thing as special providences, for if this isn't one, let them account for it that can." "I know it's so," said Mrs. Taylor fervently. "John Brown, I could worship you, I could go down on my knees to you. Didn't something tell you? Didn't you feel that you were sent? I could kiss the hem of your lap robe." He was not able to speak, he was helpless with shame and fright. Mrs. Taylor went on. "Why, just look at it all around, Julia Glossop. Any person can see the hand of Providence in it. Here at noon, what do we see? We see the smoke rising. I speak up and say, that's the old people's cabin afire. Didn't I, Julia Glossop? The very words you said, Nancy Taylor. I was as close to you as I am now, and I heard them. You may have said hut instead of cabin, but in substance it's the same. And you were looking pale, too." "Pale? I was that pale that if, why, you just compare it with this lap robe." Then the next thing I said was, "Mary Taylor, tell the hired man to rig up the team, we'll go to the rescue." And she said, "Mother, don't you know you told him he could drive to see his people and stay over Sunday?" And it was just so, I declare for it, I had forgotten it. "Then," said I, "we'll go afoot." And go we did, and found Sarah Enderby on the road. "And we all went together," said Mrs. Enderby, "and found the cabin set fire to and burnt down by the crazy one, and the poor old things so old and feeble that they couldn't go afoot. And we got them to a shady place and made them as comfortable as we could, and began to wonder which way to turn to find some way to get them conveyed to Nancy Taylor's house. And I spoke up and said, 'Now what did I say? Didn't I say, Providence will provide?' Why, sure as you live, so you did, I had forgotten it." "So had I," said Mrs. Glossop and Mrs. Taylor, "but you certainly said it. Now wasn't that remarkable?" "Yes, I said it. And then we went to Mr. Mosley's, 2 miles, and all of them were gone to the camp meeting over on Stony Fork. And then we came all the way back, 2 miles, and then here, another mile, and Providence has provided. You see it yourselves." They gazed at each other awestruck, and lifted their hands and said in unison, "It's perfectly wonderful." "And then," said Mrs. Glossop, "what do you think we had better do, let Mr. Brown drive the old people to Nancy Taylor's one at a time, or put both of them in the buggy, and him lead the horse. Brown gasped. Now then, that's a question, said Mrs. Enderby. You see, we are all tired out, and any way we fix it, it's going to be difficult. For if Mr. Brown takes both of them, at least one of us must go back to help him, for he can't load them into the buggy by himself, and they so helpless. That is so, said Mrs. Taylor. It doesn't look, oh, how would this do? One of us drive there with Mr. Brown, and the rest of you go along to my house and get things ready. I'll go with him. He and I together can lift one of the old people into the buggy, then drive her to my house and— But who will take care of the other one? Said Mrs. Enderby. We mustn't leave her there in the woods alone, especially the crazy one. There and back is 8 miles, you see. They had all been sitting on the grass beside the buggy for a while, now, trying to rest their weary bodies. They fell silent a moment or two, and struggled in thought over the baffling situation. Then Mrs. Enderby brightened and said, I think I've got the idea now. You see, we can't walk anymore. Think what we've done. 4 miles there, 2 to Mostly, S is 6, then back to here. 9 miles since noon and not a bite to eat. I declare I don't see how we've done it. And as for me, I am just famishing. Now, somebody's got to go back to help Mr. Brown. There's no getting around that. But whoever goes has got to ride, not walk. So my idea is this. One of us to ride back with Mr. Brown, then ride to Nancy Taylor's house with one of the old people, leaving Mr. Brown to keep the other old one company. You all to go now to Nancy's and rest and wait. Then one of you drive back and get the other one and drive her to Nancy's, and Mr. Brown walk. Splendid, they all cried. Oh, that will do, that will answer perfectly. And they all said that Mrs. Enderby had the best head for planning, in the company, and they said that they wondered that they hadn't thought of this simple plan themselves. They hadn't meant to take back the compliment, good simple souls, and didn't know they had done it. After a consultation, it was decided that Mrs. Enderby should drive back with Brown, she being entitled to the distinction because she had invented the plan. Everything now being satisfactorily arranged and settled, the ladies rose, relieved and happy, and brushed down their gowns, and 3 of them started homeward. Mrs. Enderby set her foot on the buggy step and was about to climb in, when Brown found a remnant of his voice and gasped out. Please, Mrs. Enderby, call them back. I am very weak. I can't walk, I can't indeed. Why, dear Mr. Brown, you do look pale. I am ashamed of myself that I didn't notice it sooner. Come back, all of you. Mr. Brown is not well. Is there anything I can do for you, Mr. Brown? I'm real sorry. Are you in pain? No, madam, only weak. I am not sick, but only just weak lately, not long, but just lately. The others came back, and poured out their sympathies and commiserations, and were full of self-reproaches for not having noticed how pale he was. And they at once struck out a new plan, and soon agreed that it was by far the best of all. They would all go to Nancy Taylor's house and see to Brown's needs first. He could lie on the sofa in the parlor, and while Mrs. Taylor and Mary took care of him, the other 2 ladies would take the buggy and go and get one of the old people, and leave one of themselves with the other one, and by this time, without any solicitation, they were at the horse's head and were beginning to turn him around. The danger was imminent, but Brown found his voice again and saved himself. He said, But ladies, you are overlooking something which makes the plan impracticable. You see, if you bring one of them home, and one remains behind with the other, there will be 3 persons there when one of you comes back for that other. For someone must drive the buggy back, and 3 can't come home in it. They all exclaimed, Why surely that is so, and they were all perplexed again. Dear, dear, what can we do? Said Mrs. Glossop. It is the most mixed-up thing that ever was. The fox and the goose and the corn and things, oh dear, they are nothing to it. They sat wearily down once more, to further torture their tormented heads for a plan that would work. Presently Mary offered a plan. It was her first effort, she said. I am young and strong, and am refreshed now. Take Mr. Brown to our house and give him help. You see how plainly he needs it. I will go back and take care of the old people. I can be there in 20 minutes. You can go on and do what you first started to do. Wait on the main road at our house until somebody comes along with a wagon, then send and bring away the 3 of us. You won't have to wait long. The farmers will soon be coming back from town now. I will keep old Polly patient and cheered up. The crazy one doesn't need it. This plan was discussed and accepted. It seemed the best that could be done, in the circumstances, and the old people must be getting discouraged by this time. Brown felt relieved and was deeply thankful. Let him once get to the main road, and he would find a way to escape. Then Mrs. Taylor said, The evening chill will be coming on pretty soon, and those poor old burnt-out things will need some kind of covering. Take the laprobe with you, dear." "Very well, mother, I will." She stepped to the buggy and put out her hand to take it. That was the end of the tale. The passenger who told it said that, when he read the story 25 years ago in a train, he was interrupted at that point. The train jumped off a bridge. At first, we thought we could finish the story quite easily, and we set to work with confidence. But it soon began to appear that it was not a simple thing, but difficult and baffling. This was on account of Brown's character, great generosity and kindliness, but complicated with unusual shyness and diffidence, particularly in the presence of ladies. There was his love for Mary, in a hopeful state but not yet secure, just in a condition, indeed, where its affair must be handled with great tact, and no mistakes made, no offense given. And there was the mother wavering, half willing by adroit and flawless diplomacy to be won over, now, or perhaps never at all. Also, there were the helpless old people yonder in the woods waiting, their fate and Brown's happiness to be determined by what Brown should do within the next 2 seconds. Mary was reaching for the laprobe. Brown must decide. There was no time to be lost. Of course, none but a happy ending of the story would be accepted by the jury. The finish must find Brown in high credit with the ladies, his behavior without blemish, his modesty unwounded, his character for self-sacrifice maintained, the old people rescued through him, their benefactor, all the party proud of him, happy in him, his praises on all their tongues. We tried to arrange this, but it was beset with persistent and irreconcilable difficulties. We saw that Brown's shyness would not allow him to give up the laprobe. This would offend Mary and her mother, and it would surprise the other ladies, partly because this stinginess toward the suffering old people would be out of character with Brown, and partly because he was a special providence and could not properly act so. If asked to explain his conduct, his shyness would not allow him to tell the truth, and lack of invention and practice would find him incapable of contriving a lie that would wash. We worked at the troublesome problem until 3 in the morning. Meantime, Mary was still reaching for the laprobe. We gave it up and decided to let her continue to reach. It is the reader's privilege to determine for himself how the thing came out. Chapter 3. It is more trouble to make a maxim than it is to do right. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. On the 7th day out, we saw a dim, vast bulk standing up out of the wastes of the Pacific, and knew that that spectral promontory was Diamond Head, a piece of this world which I had not seen before for 29 years. So we were nearing Honolulu, the capital city of the Sandwich Islands, those islands which to me were paradise, a paradise which I had been longing all those years to see again. Not any other thing in the world could have stirred me as the sight of that great rock did. In the night, we anchored a mile from shore. Through my port, I could see the twinkling lights of Honolulu and the dark bulk of the mountain range that stretched away right and left. I could not make out the beautiful Nuana Valley, but I knew where it lay, and remembered how it used to look in the old times. We used to ride up it on horseback in those days, we young people, and branch off and gather bones in a sandy region where one of the first Kamehameha's battles was fought. He was a remarkable man for a king, and he was also a remarkable man for a savage. He was a mere kinglet, and of little or no consequence at the time of Captain Cook's arrival in 1788, but about 4 years afterward, he conceived the idea of enlarging his sphere of influence. That is a courteous modern phrase which means robbing your neighbor, for your neighbor's benefit, and the great theater of its benevolences is Africa. Kamehameha went to war, and in the course of 10 years he whipped out all the other kings and made himself master of every one of the 9 or 10 islands that form the group. But he did more than that. He bought ships, freighted them with sandalwood and other native products, and sent them as far as South America and China. He sold to his savages the foreign stuffs and tools and utensils which came back in these ships, and started the march of civilization. It is doubtful if the match to this extraordinary thing is to be found in the history of any other savage. Savages are eager to learn from the white man any new way to kill each other, but it is not their habit to seize with avidity and apply with energy the larger and nobler ideas which he offers them. The details of Kamehameha's history show that he was always hospitably ready to examine the white man's ideas, and that he exercised a tidy discrimination in making his selections from the samples placed on view. A shrewder discrimination than was exhibited by his son and successor, Liholiho, I think. Liholiho could have qualified as a reformer, perhaps, but as a king he was a mistake. A mistake because he tried to be both king and reformer. This is mixing fire and gunpowder together. A king has no proper business with reforming. His best policy is to keep things as they are, and if he can't do that, he ought to try to make them worse than they are. This is not guesswork. I have thought over this matter a good deal, so that if I should ever have a chance to become a king, I would know how to conduct the business in the best way. When Liholiho succeeded his father, he found himself possessed of an equipment of royal tools and safeguards, which a wiser king would have known how to husband and judiciously employ and make profitable. The entire country was under the one scepter, and his was that scepter. There was an established church, and he was the head of it. There was a standing army, and he was the head of that. An army of 114 privates under command of 27 generals and a field marshal. There was a proud and ancient hereditary nobility. There was still one other asset. This was the taboo, an agent endowed with a mysterious and stupendous power, an agent not found among the properties of any European monarch, a tool of inestimable value in the business. Liholiho was headmaster of the taboo. The taboo was the most ingenious and effective of all the inventions that has ever been devised for keeping a people's privileges satisfactorily restricted. It required the sexes to live in separate houses. It did not allow people to eat in either house, they must eat in another place. It did not allow a man's womenfolk to enter his house. It did not allow the sexes to eat together. The men must eat first, and the women must wait on them. Then the women could eat what was left, if anything was left, and wait on themselves. I mean, if anything of a coarse or unpalatable sort was left, the women could have it. But not the good things, the fine things, the choice things, such as pork, poultry, bananas, coconuts, the choicer varieties of fish, and so on. By the taboo, all these were sacred to the men. The women spent their lives longing for them and wondering what they might taste like, and they died without finding out. These rules, as you see, were quite simple and clear. It was easy to remember them, and useful. For the penalty for infringing any rule in the whole list was death. Those women easily learned to put up with shark and taro and dog for a diet when the other things were so expensive. It was death for anyone to walk upon tabooed ground, or defile a tabooed thing with his touch, or fail in due servility to a chief, or step upon the king's shadow. The nobles and the king and the priests were always suspending little rags here and there and yonder, to give notice to the people that the decorated spot or thing was taboo, and death lurking near. The struggle for life was difficult and chancy in the islands in those days. Thus advantageously was the new king situated. Will it be believed that the first thing he did was to destroy his established church, root and branch? He did indeed do that. To state the case figuratively, he was a prosperous sailor who burnt his ship and took to a raft. This church was a horrid thing. It heavily oppressed the people. It kept them always trembling in the gloom of mysterious threatenings. It slaughtered them in sacrifice before its grotesque idols of wood and stone. It cowed them, it terrorized them, it made them slaves to its priests, and through the priests to the king. It was the best friend a king could have, and the most dependable. To a professional reformer who should annihilate so frightful and so devastating a power as this church, reverence and praise would be due. But to a king who should do it, could properly be due nothing but reproach. Reproach softened by sorrow, sorrow for his unfitness for his position. He destroyed his established church, and his kingdom is a republic today, in consequence of that act. When he destroyed the church and burned the idols, he did a mighty thing for civilization and for his people's weal, but it was not business. It was unkingly, it was inartistic. It made trouble for his line. The American missionaries arrived while the burned idols were still smoking. They found the nation without a religion, and they repaired the defect. They offered their own religion, and it was gladly received. But it was no support to arbitrary kingship, and so the kingly power began to weaken from that day. 47 years later, when I was in the islands, Kamehameha was trying to repair Liholiho's blunder, and not succeeding. He had set up an established church and made himself the head of it, but it was only a pinchbeck thing, an imitation, a bauble, an empty show. It had no power, no value for a king. It could not harry or burn or slay. It in no way resembled the admirable machine which Liholiho destroyed. It was an established church without an establishment. All the people were dissenters.